Today's show is sponsored by Mailtrap, modern email delivery for developers. The complete email API that does everything you need it to do. Try it today at mailtrap.io and get 20% off for all plans with the promo code CLOUDCAST. That's mailtrap.io, mailtrap.io.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Another weekend perspective as we move into the last month of the year. December is upon us, and hope everybody's doing well, getting ready for the holiday season, getting ready for the end of the year. Hopefully, people are, getting ready to spend some time with family, maybe get away from work for a little bit. But until then, we've got roughly a month left. So let's jump right into another weekend perspective. And I got to thinking about, I listened to a podcast a couple of weeks ago, the Acquired podcast. So the Acquired folks do a very, very good job of both kind of, explaining companies, the history of companies and their role in, oftentimes very, very large companies and kind of how they got to be where they were. They oftentimes, go through their history, go through what their business model looked like, where they made certain decisions and so forth. So a really good show if you're into, kind of understanding how businesses work, how industries work and so forth. But they also have sort of a secondary podcast series in which they do interviews with leaders, business leaders, technology leaders and so forth. And they did an interview with the CEO of Vercel, Vercel, a company who we've actually had on the show before. I'll have to go back and put that link in the show notes. But they got to talking about, what they had done to build their company. And their company is fundamentally a platform as a service company, right? They're a company who helps you build web applications. And I thought it was an interesting interview, but it really got me thinking as they were starting to talk about some new capabilities they have in terms of bringing AI capabilities to their platform. And it got me thinking, we really haven't talked about PaaS all that much lately. At least it feels like for the last 4 or 5 years. But the premise of PaaS, the concept of PaaS, in essence, basically saying like people want to, developers want to be productive. They want to go solve business problems with technology, with applications, but they'd like as much of that cruft under the covers, the infrastructure, the security, the scalability, all sorts of things to kind of be abstracted away from them. So they can just kind of go work and focus on the task that they want to have as opposed to all the implementation details. And, I've always sort of said, and we've talked about this a million times in the show as we've covered PaaS for, almost 15 years now. The concept itself is very, very powerful, but the implementation has always struggled in one way, shape, or form, whether it was, the languages that were supported, where it was supported, cloud-specific, language-specific, framework-specific. The limitations always seem to sort of be the bottleneck for, PaaS taking over all the ways that applications could be built. But as I was listening to this interview, I really got to thinking, the thing that happens in our industry oftentimes is when there is a lull, when there is a slowdown, when people sort of stop thinking about something as being kind of new and sexy and kind of the next big thing, as we've sort of done over the last 4 or 5 years, and especially the last 3 years as we've really started to think about AI, is, you start to get some interesting thinking going on, and people really start rethinking, going back and looking at previous ideas, and maybe the technology has changed or the cost structure of things have changed or whatever it might be. And I started to think about, are we potentially at the beginning, do folks like Vercel and maybe others that are out there, are they beginning to create what we would consider sort of the next generation of PaaS, right? The big sort of leap that might move us forward to this thing that many people have said, this would be a nice way in order for the world to build and consume technology, but we've always sort of, put barriers in the way. Are we potentially at the beginning of, having the next right tools in place, the right things in place, the right way of thinking about things in place in order to start making that dream, that goal, a possibility? And so I kind of want to dig into that a little bit today, and we'll do that right after the break. Self-driving cars, delivery drones, and fleets of automated mining machines have moved from headlines to habits, but they can only travel as fast as the tech underneath it. On Interconnected, a new show by Equinix that explores the hidden infrastructure behind our connected future, they shed light on the challenges of scaling safety, where computation happens, and a future where cities are built with autonomy in mind. MIT research scientist Brian Reimer and emerging technology leader Patrina Steele explain how the way we move is changing and where the future will take us. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, another weekend perspective. I want to dive a little bit into kind of the future of platform as a service, or PaaS. And, as I said, I was listening to an acquired episode. I'll put a link in the show notes. It got me kind of thinking, with some of the new technologies that are available, especially with AI, and we're seeing so many developers interacting with coding assistants and so forth. Could we be at the beginning of some building blocks being in place for somebody to really start thinking about what would the next generation of platform as a service really look like? And maybe that thing that gets created, we don't call it platform as a service anymore, because platform as a service was very much a concept that was built around the idea of the layer of platform, right? So sort of infrastructure as a service, underlying infrastructure, compute, storage, networking, those primitives, storage and security and so forth, load balancers. And then, what were the things above it that people could begin to build a platform or consume a platform that would allow them to build applications. And then obviously we had sort of the SaaS layer above that if applications were just there and you're just consuming applications. But what sort of dawned on me was, and I think I mentioned this a little bit in the Things I'm Thankful For episode a week ago, was the idea that, as I play around a little bit with this Vercel v0 service, is the idea that it basically, the previous iterations of PaaS all said, let's abstract things below what the developer wants to deal with. And what dawned on me as I was starting to interact with the Vercel v0 service was it basically just says, what do you want to build? Right. And in essence, what they're doing is they're saying, let's abstract the development. Let's extract the developers, if you will. Maybe not the development, but the developers. And I don't mean that in a negative way, like, hey, we'll never need developers anymore. But it was a very interesting sort of way of thinking about going, well, the end result of this is we're still going to build some sort of application. It's going to be a portal or a website or a web app or whatever it might be. But it was very much focused on saying, let's abstract this another layer up to where you just tell me what you'd like to do, right? So maybe you say, look, I want to start a small business and I want this to be the experience that my customers would have. And this is what we're going to sell. And this is how we're going to sell it. And this is the experience I want them to have in terms of interacting with us and the process in which you determine, what you want to buy, if that's what you're doing, if you're selling something, and here's the checkout process and so forth. And it really kind of dawned on me that we haven't, that sort of thing had always been in the abstract, in the construct of, a systems integrator would help you do that, or a consultant would help you do that, or you would have to figure out all those things yourself, right? And I feel like at this point, there are so many patterns that people have built in terms of web applications. And again, I keep coming back to this for Vercel. I'm just using them as an example. They don't, this doesn't necessarily have to be what the future looks like, but maybe they are building the future. We've seen so many patterns that happen for, how web applications are built and how different interactions are built, that it feels like at this point, as long as you kind of want the mainstream things, you want some sort of catalog, you want some sort of interaction, you want, pricing, whatever it might be, all the sort of standard stuff you want. I should be able to just tell the system, that's what I want. There should be enough best practices built to where you're not worried about, oh, this is going to be crappy code, it's not going to work. You can just tell it, hey, I'm willing to pay for it to be highly available. So, some sort of level of protection, although maybe that should just be built in. But maybe you pay for some sort of level of protection. Maybe you pay for some sort of level of auditing to make sure that, your financial transactions or your ability to keep customer information protected is done properly and can be audited. And maybe there are results that come out, periodically. But it feels like if, we're starting to have coding agents that could do things better, and we've got enough common best practices for certain kinds of tasks that we shouldn't be that far off from being able to do things that are, not just sort of no code level, just process automation, right? Like I want these 10 steps to all be automated and turn that into a process. But like you could, essentially take a business model, take a business plan that you created and say, I want a smart system to build the technology for me. And the more I think about that, I feel like, well, maybe that is what the next PaaS is going to look like for us. And maybe it wouldn't be called a PaaS. Maybe, somebody will come up with some unique name for it. It'll be a business PaaS or something along those lines. But, I feel like that could be the foundation of a lot of very interesting things in terms of being able to experiment, being able to start a small business, being able to link into marketplaces of other things that would be beneficial to small businesses. So, I mean, I could see this, as a service that a Y Combinator would build. Somebody who does this, I could see, a venture capital firm sort of doing this and saying, gosh, it makes no sense for every one of my investment companies to go starting and doing this all over again. I know for myself, having worked at a number of startups, like just the process of things like, creating marketing teams and marketing, programs and having to set up CRM systems and all sorts of other things to send out email. Like those should just be sort of standard things that I can just plug into and, not have to buy the entire thing. I just sort of rent some capacity from it. I should be able to say, hey, this is how I want to link it into my finance system. This is how I want to link it into my payment system. This is how I want to link it into my supply chain or expose a supply chain. And I feel like all those things, the PaaSes, today, sort of want to expose a database or they want to expose a queue or they want to do, but like, I feel like there should be an ability, and especially with AI, to sort of take, again, because it's good at interpreting words and then being able to maybe not even write the code. Maybe the code is, has been well built because again, it's patternized. And then the question really becomes like, the value of the PaaS is, a bunch of these templates that you can kind of block together the same way that you're doing that with no code today, but you're not doing it in terms of like little aspects of processes. You're doing it in terms of sort of like capabilities of business. And the things they're going to augment that with are, for example, if, you say, hey, we need to have an element of an accountant. We need to have an element of a lawyer. We need to have an element of, whatever that thing might be, that you can essentially, buy as an agent. So you want to buy a strategist, you want to buy a lawyer, you want to buy an accountant or an auditor or something along those lines. I feel like those should be services that would sort of augment the business, right? And you think about different capabilities. You want to buy somebody who specializes in, buying online ads, or you want to specialize in somebody who, specializes in negotiating tariffs, for example, right? Like, feel like those services, at least at a basic level, right, at a junior to mid level, should be things that you ought to be able to just plug into your application, which is really just the foundation of your business. And I feel like in looking at some of those things, that becomes really the new foundation of what this business platform as a service starts to look like. And I'm sure there are incubators who do somewhat similar things like that, but I do, I see so many of these startups who are, hiring for all these roles to do the exact same thing. Or I've talked to people who have, jumped around from different companies and, I specialize in setting up, payroll for a company. Like I feel like those sort of things should be pluggable at this point, right? And so I'll be very curious to see, if the beginnings of what people like Vercel are doing with V0, in which they're allowing people who are maybe non-coders, but are, business leaders or people who want to start businesses to basically say, hey, this is what I want to build. And they'll go about building it for you. And then you start to bring into, going, okay, well, how reliable can you make that for my business? Because if that's going to be the foundation of my business, can you build troubleshooting into that? So, because I don't necessarily, the thought process is like, how far can you take a business these days without necessarily hiring IT? right? Without necessarily hiring developers, without necessarily doing that. And I know certain people are probably listening to this going like, whoa, man, hold on a second. Don't be displacing us just yet. But I do feel like as we get smarter with building agents, with building these platforms, um, you know, again, you've moved the developers up the stack into, you know, building an agent and building the reliability of an agent and the deterministic nature of an agent against a domain. It feels like there is huge possibility there. And it also feels like there is, huge possibility to be able to, take the patterns that we've seen in the past that have worked very, very well, the integrations that we've seen in the past that work very, very well, that are very common and happen all the time, and start to expose those in ways that, people who just think in terms of business, who just think in terms of business models and in terms of how markets work, um, can get closer to being able to bring that to reality without having to go, oh, I have to find a technical founder and I have to find an IT staff and I need to, like, I feel like there are people who should be able to deliver that at least within the next couple of years. And I think there's a lot of aspect of this that could become very interesting in terms of marketplaces that get exposed through these things, whether they are expert agent marketplaces or integration services marketplaces. I know those types of things kind of exist today. If you want to plug a payment service into what you do, it's just an API key and so forth. But if you don't really understand how all that stuff works, you wouldn't necessarily know. Oh, okay, it's pretty simple to just plug in a Stripe. But also it becomes how do I make sure that I've done it right for the right markets that I want to participate in, as far as like internationally? How do I make sure that my auditing, my taxes, my accounting are being done properly? Are they provided by that service? Do I have to go hire those people? Can I just get a rudimentary agent to take care of those things for me? And I think understanding how those things can kind of work together becomes the next iteration, the next generation of what these platforms become. And the more I think about it, the constructs of, people say, hey, software's kind of going away, it'll become agents, and that's where SaaS is going. But I actually think there will be a set of services that will be available to us that will be kind of the above SaaS in the stack, right? So yes, there will still be infrastructure as a service. That PaaS layer maybe moves itself up even above the SaaS layer, and it becomes sort of a business PaaS. And I think there is going to be a huge, huge opportunity for that to emerge. Because whether it becomes something that large companies do to help with creating innovation and experimentation, or whether it's for small businesses, or whether ideas just manifest out of that. But anyways, that's what I was thinking. And again, I think now might be the perfect time for somebody to start experimenting with that, as we start to see some maturity around agents. We start to see people become comfortable with the idea that some of these technologies can be interacted with in ways that are less technical than the past, and people who are finding domain expertise and are able to turn that into repeatable, deterministic actions that come out of people just saying, hey, I want to build this sort of business. What would that experience look like from a technology perspective? So anyways, I'd love to hear people's feedback on that. I'm not necessarily trying to invent a new sort of category, but I do think as the technology has emerged, there will probably be something above SaaS. We hadn't really thought about that in the past. We sort of said, SaaS was kind of the top of the food chain, but I do think there will be sort of a business platform as a service that will live above the SaaS layer, as SaaS becomes a collection of agents, and we sort of aggregate that up into something that becomes, collectively more and more. So, anyways, something to think about for 2026. I think we'll start to see that happen more as agents become more prevalent, as people start to get past some of the hype of AI in 2026, as we start to sort of turn it into things that become more tangible for business, monetizable, realistic, and so forth. So, curious your thoughts on the idea of sort of a business PaaS above the SaaS layer and what that might look like. And maybe if you're aware of companies working on that kind of stuff, if you can, reach out and have them talk to us, because we'd love to sort of explore the ideas that they are exploring as well. So with that, I'll wrap it up and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.